This training is about major unusual incidents, also known as MUIs, and unusual incidents, also known as UIs. The purpose of the training is to educate providers and county board staff on the reporting requirements of UIs and MUIs. We will go over the difference between MUIs and UIs, the different MUI categories, the timelines, and to whom to report incidents to. We will start with unusual incident reports. What is an unusual incident? It is an event or an occurrence that is not consistent with routine operations, policies, procedures, or the ISP, but it is not an MUI. Here's a list of examples of what an UI may be. An example of a UI would be an individual who fell, but there are no injuries. An MUI would be an individual who fell, hit their head, and needed 5 stitches. An investigation must be completed for every incident report written. UIs must be reported by the next working day following the day of discovery. If you found out on Monday, best practice is to report that day, but no later than the next day, which would be Tuesday. Independent providers and county board staff need to report to the county board. For agency providers, they are to notify their designated person within 24 hours of discovery. Next, you need to figure out what exactly occurred. Why did the incident occur? You may need to ask several questions to get to the root of why the incident occurred. Also, ensure immediate action. What steps were taken to address the incident? You need to assess for injuries. If 2 individuals are involved, you may need to separate them. Or if it is involving an individual and a staff member, you may need to separate them. You may need to call for assistance if applicable. You will need to notify the guardian if they have one, or notify another person the individual has identified, such as a parent or emergency contact, and other providers to ensure continuity of care, such as home staff. The team will determine the causes and contributing factors, why did the incident occur, and develop a prevention plan to prevent it from occurring again. Who must report? Anyone who is working in the DD field, such as direct support, managers, nurses, and county board staff. What information is needed on the incident report? We need demographics, which include the individual's name, address, date of incident, time of incident, and location of incident, such as home, at work, or at a park. When writing the description of the incident, make sure to answer the questions who, what, where, and when. If the individual has an injury, need to know what the injury is or looks like, and the location of the injury. For example, has a 2-inch cut on the left bicep. The primary person, also known as PPI, is the person who caused the incident or perpetrator. For example, if an individual's money is stolen, the PPI would be the name of the person who stole the money. This is never an individual who is receiving services, even if peer-to-peer incidents. Also note what the relationship is between the PPI and individual. If there were witnesses to the incident, get their names and, if possible, their statements of what they saw and any actions they took. For notifications, who did you report the incident to? Did you notify the agency you work for, the guardian, the county board, the police, or children's services? Include what person's name, title, the date, and time you notified them. We would need to know if there was any further medical follow-up. For example, if an individual hit their head and was taken to the hospital by squad, we need the hospital discharge paperwork. Finally, the name of the person who completed the report and their signature. Agency providers do not have to send their UIs to the county board. They are only required to send MUIs. However, all independent providers, both waiver and local funded, which are individual budgets, must report all UIs and MUIs to the county board within 1 working day from discovery. After the incident report has been submitted, a prevention plan needs to be developed to try to prevent the incident from occurring again. This needs to be a team process, including the individual. The team needs to determine the cause and contributing factors. What is the root cause, or why did the incident occur? This may take several questions to get to the cause. For example, an individual tripped over a rug and fell. On the surface, it may just be that the rug was not lying on the floor completely. But asking further questions, did the individual have any issues walking? It was found out that the person did not pick up their feet. When asked why the person was not picking up their feet, the individual reported that their knee has been hurting to bend. Once the team feels that they have the root cause or causes, the team can develop a prevention plan. For every cause, there needs to be a prevention plan. The team needs to determine who is going to do each plan and by when. So for example, our example above, the plan regarding the rug, the house manager will remove the rug by the end of the week. The house nurse will schedule an appointment with the primary doctor to have the individual's knee checked out by the end of the week. Prevention plans need to be realistic. Can the person assigned to do the task able to complete it? Is it reasonable for the individual to pick up their feet? All waiver providers, both agency and independent, must keep a UI log of all their UIs that occurred during the month. The logs must include the name of the individuals, brief description of the incidents, any injuries, time and date of the incidents, location of the incidents, the cause and contributing factors, and the prevention plans, which are all information from the UI reports and prevention plans. Reminder, the UI logs must be reviewed on a monthly basis to check for any trends or patterns. On the log, it must be noted the date reviewed, by whom, and if any trends or patterns are found. If a trend or pattern is found, then a prevention plan needs to be developed. All waiver providers, agency and independent, are required to maintain a monthly UI log and review it minimally monthly. Waiver providers are responsible to notify the SSA of any trend or patterns of MUIs for a specific individual. The trends and patterns are reported on the monthly UI log, so you have to note that on the log what you see. A trend and pattern is an incident of similar nature, can be the same type of incident, it can then be a same staff, occurs with the same staff or same location, and it occurs 3 times in a week or 5 times in a month. As of July 1st of 2025, providers will no longer need to submit their UI logs to the county board. Now we will discuss major unusual incidents, or MUIs. An MUI is an alleged, suspected, or actual occurrence of an incident when reason to believe the health and safety of an individual may be adversely affected or an individual may be placed on a reasonable risk of harm when there is a reason to believe the incident has occurred. And there are 3 categories, A, B, and C, which we will go over. Report, report, report. We will now go over what the different categories are for MUIs so you know what to report. This could include incidents that occur between providers and individuals, or something that the provider has observed someone else doing to an individual. First, we will discuss Category A MUIs. These are investigations that are conducted by law enforcement or children's services or the investigative agent and include the following: unexplained and unanticipated death, which was originally called accidental or suspicious death, but the title will be changing as of 7/1/25. Exploitation, failure to report, misappropriation, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and that was originally called verbal abuse. Again, that is changing on 7/1/25. Prohibited sexual relations and rights code violation. Exploitation. This often gets mixed up with misappropriation, but they are different. Exploitation is using the individual's disability for your advantage. This is unlawful or improper act of using an individual or their resources for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain. For example, you have a cleaning business and the individual you provide services to likes to clean. While you are providing services to the individual, you have them assist you at one of your cleaning jobs. You get paid for completing the cleaning job and for providing services to the individual, who is not compensated for their work. Another example is that you and the individual is out doing errands and getting lunch. You ask them to buy you lunch. This is not acceptable or consensual, as the individual might be afraid to say no or does not want to upset you. In either example, these are unlawful and improper use of personal benefit and profit. The next several slides will be about the different type of abuse, which is a crime and needs to be reported to either law enforcement and or, if the individual is under the age of 21, must be reported to Children's Services. Physical abuse is physical force that reasonably expected to cause harm, such as hitting, slapping, pushing, dragging, or throwing an object at an individual. The PPI could be staff member, a family member, or it might be a person whom the individual does not know. For example, an individual is at the park and a person who is not known to the individual comes and hits the individual, causing him to go to the ER. In this scenario, this is a crime and needs to be reported to the police, even if the individual or team does not know who that person was. It is up to the law enforcement to do the investigation. If the individual is under the age of 21, then Children's Services would need to be called as well. Physical abuse is not between two individuals who receive services. That will be discussed later under peer-to-peer. Sexual abuse is unlawful sexual contact or act. This is not consensual. For an individual under the age of 18, it is never consensual. This would also include a person exposing themselves. Can be grooming, such as leaving out pornographic materials or pictures for individuals to see, especially for a minor. Sexual abuse often starts out as grooming by trying to gain the trust of the individual by giving gifts. Even if a sexual act has not occurred, but you suspect grooming of a minor child, you must report to Children's Services. Verbal abuse is now called emotional abuse. It is the use of words, gestures, like a person using their finger to make it look like a gun and then shoot it at the person, or other communicated means to threaten, harass, coerce, intimidate, humiliate an individual. The reaction of the individual does not matter. Misappropriation is a form of theft and is a crime that must be reported to law enforcement. Misappropriation is the intent to deprive, which is not giving the individual their funds or allowing them access to their money. Defraud is identity theft, such as opening credit accounts, signing checks as the person. The amount does not matter. Another thing to consider is that besides reporting to law enforcement, does it need to be reported to the 3 credit bureaus, Expedient, Equifax, and TransUnion, to check the individual's credit score and or freeze the individual's credit. Reporting to the credit bureaus is not a requirement, but may help discover if any other credit was taken out in the individual's name and to prevent any further misappropriation. Failure to report is when a DD employee fails to immediately report an allegation, suspected or actual abuse, neglect, misappropriation, or exploitation, and the individual may have experienced suffering or substantial risk of harm. So it is important to report these within the 4-hour time frame. Failure to report can put you on the abuser registry and possibly result in criminal charges. Neglect is having a duty to do but not doing it, such as but not limited to, not providing care to a person or another person at risk. Other examples are not administering medication or not following the supervision levels needed for the individual. By failing to do your duty, this places the individual or another individual at serious risk, which results in a serious injury or even death. A serious injury is when medical treatment is needed by a physician, nurse assistant, or nurse practitioner. Neglect can be a system issue, which is attributed to multiple variables such as staff not being trained, or it can be, there can also be more than one PPI. Prohibited sexual relations. At no time is it appropriate for a DD employee or a contracted person who provides services to a person served to have consensual sexual relationship with an individual. The only time it would be appropriate is if the DD employee is the spouse of the individual. If it is not consensual conduct or contact, then this would be considered sexual abuse. Rights code violation is the violation of an individual's rights. This can be both an UI or MUI. The difference is that an individual's health and safety is at risk. Then it is a MUI. An example of a UI is a person is denied to watch TV because they did not finish their dinner. There's no health and safety risk. An example of a MUI is a person who frequently gets UTIs is denied using the bathroom, which could result the person getting a UTI and needing medical treatment. Now we will cover category Bs. These will also be investigated by the investigative agent. Medical emergencies are emergencies that need medical intervention to save the individual's life, such as CPR, using an AED, choking relief techniques. With the use of narcotics, the administration of medication, such as Narcan, is also considered a medical intervention. If there is a medical emergency, it does not mean you do not help the individual, but just elevates it to the level of an MUI. Attempted suicide is when an individual makes an actual physical attempt that results in emergency treatment, inpatient observation, and hospital admission. If a person talks about suicide but does not actually attempt or does not have the means of following through, for example, I'm going to take all my medications to go to sleep, but their medications are locked up and they cannot access it, it is not considered an attempted suicide and would be a UI. You should always, always, always follow up with any talk of suicide threats, as this is usually a warning sign. The individual should be taken to the hospital or call their doctor immediately to get the next strategy. Only when the individual has actually attempted suicide does this become an MUI. Call 911 or take the individual to the emergency room. If you are not sure what to do, call the county board for guidance. Peer-to-peer acts are when two individuals who are receiving services are involved. There are 4 subcategories: physical act, sexual act, exploitation, and theft. We will start with physical act. Physical act is an altercation that results in an injury that is treated by a physician, a physician's assistant, or a nurse practitioner. Or it involves an individual being strangled by another individual, a bloody nose, a bloody lip, a black eye, a concussion, or biting that results in the breaking of the skin. An individual may or may not seek medical treatment for this. Or it can result in an individual being arrested, charged, or incarcerated. It does not matter if one of the individuals is firmly fixed on a peer. The individual who is the victim may be just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Next is peer-to-peer misappropriation or theft and exploitation. Theft is when an individual takes money or an property from another individual. Unlike misappropriation as discussed in category A, in peer-to-peer, the value needs to be $20 or more, or the property has to have significant personal value to the individual whose property was stolen. So, for example, an individual received a ring from their mother, but it was from a bubblegum machine. The ring is not valued at $20, but it has a sentimental value because the ring was given to the individual by their mother. The individual is very upset as this was the last thing mom gave them, as mom is deceased. So, and then exploitation is the same as in category A, but this involves two peers. One individual is using the peer's resources for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain. An example of this is that there are two roommates, and one rents a shed to keep their stuff in. The other roommate decides they want to keep their stuff in that shed as well, and puts their stuff in there, but does not pay their share of the rental. The first roommate does not say anything because they are afraid or does not want to upset their roommate. Peer-to-peer sexual act is when there is sexual conduct or contact for the purpose of sexual gratification without the consent of the other peer. This is different from actual brushing up against someone. For example, if two individuals were wrestling and one brushes against the other's genitals, this was not for the purpose of sexual gratification. However, if one individual touches another individual's breast or buttocks to get arousal without the consent of the peer, this would be considered a sexual act. This would be a crime, and it would need to be reported to law enforcement. Peer-to-peer verbal acts has been removed from this category and is no longer considered an MUI. It still can be considered a UI since the use of actions, words, gestures that purposely threaten, coerce, or intimidate when there is an opportunity and ability to carry out the threat. So for it to be a UI, an example is an individual threatens a peer that they are going to kick their butt. The individual can have the opportunity to carry that action, the kicking, if they are close enough to the other individual. Missing individual. The definition has been updated and will take effect on July 1st of 2025. This can be considered an UI or MUI. If an individual is missing, it is considered an MUI when an individual cannot be located after immediate measure has been taken and the individual is at or may be in imminent risk of harm to self or others, and law enforcement has to be contacted and is not considered neglect. It would be an UI if the person is missing longer than what the ISP allows and there is no risk of harm to self or others. So for example, if an individual has 24/7 supervision eyes on and the provider is not providing that supervision level and the individual disappears for a period of time, this would be considered neglect as the provider failed to provide that supervision level. An example of a missing individual is that an individual who is a sex offender needs supervision in the community as they cannot be around children who go and they go missing and cannot be found. Even though they have the skills to be in the community is at risk and the police had to be called. Significant injury is an injury of known or unknown cause while receiving services. If an individual is not receiving services but has a significant injury, it would just be a UI. The injury may result in dental injury that requires treatment by a dentist, concussion, which is also called a closed head injury, broken, fractured bone, dislocation, second or third degree burn. This could be a severe sunburn that causes blistering or requires immobilization. So if an individual has to wear a boot on their foot, but the doctor allows the individual to remove it at night, then this would just be a UI. Also, casting of 5 or more stitches would be an MUI. Death. The name has changed to unexplained or anticipated death. Death is self-explanatory. Death can be category A or category B. In category A, the death is suspicious, maybe from an accident, or the reason may be unknown. In category B, death is natural or expected. There is no suspicion. Now we will go over category C, MUIs. The MUIs will have administrative reviews completed by the provider and investigative agent. Starting on July 1st, the administrative review form will now be completed and submitted with the incident report. This will be discussed later in the video. Law enforcement is when an individual is involved with the police and the individual has been tased, arrested, charged, or incarcerated. Unapproved behavioral support is the use of an aversive strategy or intervention prohibited by the behavior support rule or any aversive strategy that was not approved by the Human Rights Committee or without informed consent of the individual or their guardian first. There must be a risk to the individual's health and welfare. Behavior support needs to be in the ISP and approved by the Human Rights Committee. So, withholding snacks, pop, and outings without approval would be a UI, as there are no risks of harm, but it is still a rights violation. Sometimes it's behavioral strategies to ensure the individual is safe, such as the individual is upset and tries to run out into the street. The provider needs to intervene to keep them from getting hit by cars. Then this would be an MUI. Unanticipated hospitalization definition has changed starting on July 1st of 2025. It does not matter if a pre-existing condition is discussed in the ISP, such as seizures. The individual must be receiving services at the time of the hospitalization. The first criteria is any hospital admission lasting 48 hours or more, and it was not a scheduled hospitalization for a planned evaluation, a procedure, or test, and is one of the following diagnoses. And only these: aspiration, pneumonia, bowel obstruction, dehydration, medication error, seizures, sepsis. For other diagnoses, this will discuss in the second criteria. It does not matter if any of these diagnoses are described in the ISP and the individual has frequent hospitalizations due to the diagnosis, like seizures. If it meets all three areas that was just described, it will be a MUI. If an individual is in the hospital less than 48 hours, then it would just be a UI. The other criteria of unanticipated hospitalization is when an individual is readmitted to the hospital for the same diagnosis previously admitted for within the last 30 days, and they are hospitalized for 48 hours or more. So if an individual was hospitalized for the flu and was discharged, but 2 weeks later they were readmitted for the flu and they ended up staying in the hospital for a week, this would be considered an MUI. Now we are done with the categories. But before you write the report, your first priority is to ensure the health and welfare of the individual. If the incident involves a staff member who is alleged to be involved in physical or sexual abuse, the staff member must be removed from all contact with any and all individuals. If the incident is between two peers, you may need to separate them. If there's a medical emergency or injury, ensuring immediate medical treatment is received, like going to the ER. If the incident involves abuse, misappropriation, exploitation, a call to either the law enforcement or children's services need to be made. In regards to which jurisdiction for law enforcement to contact, it would need to be reported to the jurisdiction in which the incident occurred. If the incident involves a minor child, then it needs to be reported to Children's Services. These should be the first calls made before calling the county board. If you do not, the county board contact will remind you to do that. Additional notifications that need to be done on the same day the incident is discovered and before writing the report is to the county board, the guardian or another person the individual has identified, other providers of service to keep the care and support going for the individual. So for example, if an individual was at vocab and they have a provider at home, then that provider at home needs to be made aware. And then any staff or family living at the individual's residence who have responsibility for that individual's care. Also, all staff of agency providers must notify the Director of Operations within 1 working day after becoming aware of potential or determined MUIs for misappropriation, neglect, physical abuse, or sexual abuse. All county boards have a 24/7 reporting system, even during weekends and holidays. The Erie County Board has an IA contact available Monday through Friday during business hours, and after hours, an on-call SSA is available to receive and respond to all MUI reports. You are still responsible for writing an incident report and submitting it to the county board by 3 p.m. the next working day. However, there are several MUI categories that must be reported to the county board within 4 hours of discovery. These are all in Category A: unexplained and unanticipated death, exploitation, misappropriation, neglect, peer-to-peer acts, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, prohibited sexual relations, and media inquiries. A written incident report must be sent to the county board no later than 3 p.m. the day after discovery of the incident. The county board will then notify the IA by 5 p.m. the following day of an MUI report. Starting July 1st, 2025, for all Category C incidents, there must also be an administrative review form completed and submitted with the incident report. There are 3 types of MUIs that require an administrative review: law enforcement involvement, unapproved behavioral support, and unanticipated hospitalization. Each type has their own form in Appendix C, Appendix D, Appendix E, which all can be found on DODD's website. Part 1 must be completed by the provider and submitted with the incident report. The IA will complete Part 2 during their review. Also, if a DD employee is alleged to have been involved in physical or sexual abuse, they will need to be removed from any direct contact with any individuals until such time as the provider has reasonably determined that such removal is no longer necessary. Nothing preludes an employer from removing an employee if they believe it is necessary to, such as in neglect or misappropriation. The investigation will start immediately either by the police, children's services, or the investigative agent. Now that you have completed watching the video, you will need to copy the link above and paste it onto your web browser, which will take you to a quiz. In order to pass the quiz, you will need to get an 80% or better. You are able to take the quiz as many times as you need to pass the quiz. Your certificate of completion will be sent to you once we have received your completed quiz. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact any of us who are listed on this slide. This concludes the MUI UI training.